And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is March the 9th, the 68th day of this new year. Just 297 days remain to the year is over with, and we'll start a new one. Holidays and observances. It's National Barbie Day. The iconic doll has evolved over the years, inspiring generations of children to imagine the possibilities of their own lives and futures. National Napping Day. I can't urge you enough to indulge in taking a nap. Taking a little daytime snooze is like hitting the reset button, recharging energy levels and boosting productivity. Commonwealth Day. That's a diverse and vibrant family of nations spanning the globe. Commonwealth Day in Canada. National Meatball Day. National American Paddlefish Day. Made in the UK Day. Supporting local craftsmanship, investing in products crafted on British soil. Bang Clang Day. National False Teeth Day. Adelaide Cup Day. National Get Over It Day. Panic Day. Taking time to unwind and recharge is vital for your overall well-being. It can boost creativity and productivity and help even improve your mood. National Crab Meat Day. National Dishwasher Day. Amerigo Vespucci Day. You know, America's actually named after him. Fill Stapler's Day. 8 Hours Day. Joe Franklin Day. Canberra Day. National Heroes and Benefactors Day. Adelaide Fringe. National Groundwater Awareness Week. That's a vital resource. It's a hidden treasure beneath our feet. Brain Awareness Week. Pie Week. What you need to do is go into your favorite restaurant on the 14th and tell them it's Pie Day and you want to get a piece of pie for $3.14. Make Mine Chocolate. World Glaucoma Day. Sleep Awareness Week. Girl Scout Week. Universal Women's Week. Campfire USA Birthday Week. Healthcare HR Week. National Bubblegum Week. Catholic Sisters Week. Patient Safety Awareness Week. National Science and Engineering Week. National MS Awareness Week. National Green Week. The Moomba Festival. And Endometriosis Awareness Week, affecting millions of women around the world. Debilitating condition that requires compassion and effective treatment. Pulmonary Rehabilitation Week. National Aardvark Week. And the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which will go on to the 19th. Famous people born on this day: Kimberly Guilfoyle and Oscar Isaac. Well, on that note, let us see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on, especially while there's a war going on in the Middle East. Well, Iran names Mustafa Khomeini fleeing leaders. War fuels a spike in oil prices, and he's the son of Ali Khomeini. The Iran women's soccer team has signaled distress after their anthem protest. You know, reigning American journalist Mash Alinahab is urging the Australian government to protect members of Iran's women's soccer team after she said the players were labeled wartime traitors and flashed what she described as an SOS hand signal while entering into Iran. Said the team refused to sing Iran's national anthem after the reported killing of Ali Khamenei, move she framed as a public act of defiance against the regime. Well, there's a lot of athletes who apparently do not want to go back home. Well, all 4 Iran war assumptions are dead wrong. President Trump proves the experts got fooled once again. In the early days of Operation Epic Fury, while much does remain unknown, one thing has become clear: how little the conventional wisdom about foreign policy in Washington, D.C. has to do with the realities taking place on the battlefield. Traditionally, there were four things that were assumed to be near inevitable if the U.S. and or Israel were able to take significant military action against Iran. Number one, Iran's supreme leader would be untouchable. Ali Khamenei was thought to be above the battlefield fray. Two, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps would deploy its terrorist proxies to ignite a regional war. Three, Israel would be isolated in the Middle East and vulnerable to attack from Arab neighbors. And four, the U.S. would be isolated on the world stage, limited in what it could do to support Israel, which would benefit Russia and China. Well, all four of those assumptions have proved to be wrong. Obviously, the supreme leader was not untouchable, eliminated in one of the opening strikes of the mission, along with much of Iran's senior leadership. His arrogant foolishness in gathering the leadership together was, in fact, the opportunity that prompted Epic Fury to take place in the first place. But that didn't prevent the survivors from organizing a succession meeting on Tuesday, March 3rd, which was in turn targeted. Demoralized remnants of the regime are now attempting to reestablish command and control with little in terms of structure or internal communications. In addition, the predicted mass regional attack on Israel hadn't taken place because of Iran's disastrous decision to launch missiles against its neighbors, even those who had been acting as its mediators, such as Qatar and Oman. The region unified not against Israel, but against Iran. Even reports of Arab nations potentially participating in the strikes on Iran. Abraham Accords, which, although under strain since the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7, 2023, have actually held. Well, we'll see how much longer Iran can manage to stand against the strikes. Well, Jesse Jackson Jr., the son of the deceased civil rights leader, has rebuked Obama, Clinton, and Biden for not truly knowing his father during a memorial service. During his father's memorial service on Sunday, Jesse Jackson Jr. offered a sharp rebuke of the tributes given by former Democratic presidents Clinton, Obama, and Biden, noting that the trio shared one thing in common: they didn't really know his father. He said, yesterday I listened for several hours to three United States presidents who do not know Jesse Jackson talking about him. Well, the death of Jesse Jackson marks an end of an era, no question about that. The Reverend son called out the idea that his father's life wasn't defined by the political order, but by a commitment to those who were marginalized. According to what he said, he maintained a tense relationship with the political order, not because the presidents were white or black, but the demands of our message, the demands of speaking out for the least of these, those who are disinherited, the damned, the dispossessed, the disrespected. Demanded not Democratic or Republican solutions, demanded a consensus prophetic voice that at no point in time sold us out as a people. Well, finally, somebody is saying what needs to be said. Well, President Trump's strike on Iran has dealt a major blow to Putin's war machine in Ukraine. Within hours of American munitions striking Iranian soil, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky posted a statement that the Western press largely treated as a diplomatic footnote, but it was signed. It was a signal that what happens in the skies over Tehran has a direct impact on the ground in Ukraine. Zelensky explicitly endorsed the strikes, calling Iran Putin's accomplice, noted that his country had absorbed over 57,000 Iranian-supplied drone attacks, took aim at Moscow. Whenever there's American resolve, global criminals weaken, he said. This understanding must also come to the Russians. Well, Putin bragged about the Russian military machine, and it seems to have come to a bit of a halt in Ukraine. They're still making attacks using drones and missiles, but Haven't heard much about ground assaults. GOP senator calls for President Trump to remove advisor Stephen Miller. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, called on President Trump to remove longtime advisor Stephen Miller from the administration on Sunday, describing him as an embarrassment and a big problem for the administration. North Carolina Republicans' comments come on the heels of the high-profile firing of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem last week. Tillis, speaking on CNN's State of the Union, suggested Miller should be the next official to exit the West Wing in his latest shot at the top aide. He said, "It gives me pause that you have people like Miller calling the shots," Tillis told host Jake Tapper. Stephen Miller was talking about a terrorist brandishing a gun. It was Stephen Miller who said it was the position of the U.S. we should go after Greenland. It was Miller who's been repeatedly responsible for embarrassment for the president by acting too quickly, speaking first and thinking later. Well, Tillis is not running for re-election, and he specifically took aim at Miller's role in orchestrating the administration's crackdown on illegal immigration. While the GOP remains largely unified on the need for border security, Tillis argued that Miller's methods and public rhetoric, including comments regarding the shooting death of Alex Preddy, have become a liability to the president. Well, former Prince Andrew's daughters face royal exile as experts warn the York brand is washed up after his arrest. Rumors swirling about former President Andrew's daughters, Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice, are lowering the York's credibility, according to royal experts. Last week, the Daily Mail spoke with the producer behind Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's disastrous BBC Newsnight interview, Sam McAllister. She claimed that Princess Beatrice was the rainmaker in the family, a term usually used to describe somebody who pulls off major financial deals, according to the outlet. In her view, when Princess Beatrice came along unexpectedly to the face-to-face negotiation, which happened just 3 days before this interview physically happened, he called her a rainmaker. The reason is because she was protecting her father's interest. She was super polite, super nice, super friendly, but in that room with the people who were there, she was the one that had his interest purely at heart. Elena Chard, a British royal expert, told Fox News Digital that Beatrice attended a meeting prior to the Newsnight interview in a caring daughter capacity. Well, Andrew has pretty much filed his own nest, so to speak. Well, the Balkans are on edge. Kosovo political crisis sparked fears of renewed instability there. Balkan nation of Kosovo is facing a constitutional crisis after a deadline passed for electing a new head of state. Kosovo President Osmani, ally of President Trump, dissolved parliament and called for snap elections. Conflicts raging around the globe and pressure on the NATO contingent based in the West Balkan nation to keep the peace. Osman told reporters precisely because the geopolitical situation is that complex. It's important to finish the electoral process, which is coming up. And it's very hard now to imagine what will happen next, she said, according to KRO7. President Trump recently praised Kosovo's president for the great job she's doing in her country in a February speech. Osmani accepted an invitation from Trump to join the Board of Peace in January and has pledged resources to the International Stabilization Force for Gaza. Well, we'll see if Kosovo can be kept under control. Well, the Pennsylvania state trooper was fatally shot during a traffic stop, according to officials. Shot and killed Sunday night while conducting a traffic stop in Chester County, according to officials. That shooting happened in West Collin Township shortly after 9 p.m., during a traffic stop near Compass and Michael Roads. Governor Josh Shapiro announced that the trooper, identified as Timothy O'Connor, died from the shooting. The governor said, "I'm profoundly sad to announce that tonight Pennsylvania State Police family lost a son, lost a hero, and lost a dedicated public servant. Corporal Timothy O'Connor is killed tonight doing what he's dedicated his life to, and that's serving others, keeping our community safe, looking out for his fellow Pennsylvanians, especially right here in Chester County. Our entire Commonwealth State Police family, Chester County, are mourning the loss of Corporal O'Connor." There's no information on why the shooting took place. Well, the Philadelphia food stand was overwhelmed when 600 tubs of onion dip mysteriously appeared, prompting an investigation. That dip was thrown out over safety concerns. The Philadelphia food stand owner said she was left scrambling after 600 tubs of French onion dip suddenly showed up at her small center city kiosk. Surprise shipment she never ordered. Macmart owner Marty Lieberman told Fox 29 Philadelphia she began receiving boxes of Aluva Good French onion dip after getting a random email from what appeared to be an overseas promotions company offering her free food. Said she never accepted the offer and was shocked when the delivery arrived. 600 units is quite scary for a small business, she said, noting the kiosk is only about 6 feet by 11 feet. That's not a lot of space for 600 tubs of dip. At first, she considered giving the dip away to customers. After speaking with Aluva Goods, she decided to throw all of it out over fear of safety concerns. But to get rid of it because we weren't sure if any of the units were tainted, so we don't want to make our customers sick. Well, police recover a third device in an ongoing Manhattan IED investigation after 2 arrests take place. NYPD announced Sunday that the third suspicious device had been uncovered as part of an ongoing investigation into an improvised explosive device thrown during dueling protests outside Gracie Mansion a day earlier. Police had also identified a suspicious device inside a vehicle on East End Avenue between 81st and 82nd Streets and temporarily evacuated nearby buildings while the bomb squad assessed the threat. NYPD has safely removed the suspicious device from the area for further testing, and those who were evacuated are now allowed to return to their residences. But the site does remain closed for vehicular traffic. FBI New York confirmed Sunday evening the second device recovered near Gracie Mansion has also been identified as an IED. Well, the things are getting more dangerous as time goes on. Well, the search for Nancy Guthrie has entered its 5th week. Cadaver dogs are on hold. Stories out of Tucson. More than 5 weeks after the suspected abduction of Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of today's co-host Savannah Guthrie, Arizona authorities say cadaver dogs used earlier in the investigation not currently being deployed as the search continues. The Guthries believed to have been kidnapped from her home in the Catalina foothills in northern Tucson about 2:30 in the morning on February 1st. And while no suspects have been publicly identified and she's not been found, cadaver dogs have been deployed earlier in the case. According to Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, they've not been visible in later weeks. They're available if needed in the future, he said. There are a number of reasons not to be using cadaver dogs at this stage in the investigation, according to Betsy Brantner Smith, a retired police sergeant and spokeswoman for the National Police Association. One would be if there's credible evidence she's still alive. Anything is possible, Nanos told Fox News last week, adding he wouldn't discuss specific leads or evidence in the case. And there's also a lot of controversy about the future of Savannah Guthrie with her station. Archaeologists have uncovered gold-laden tomb filled with elite burial treasures from over 1,000 years ago. Archaeologists recently unearthed a gold-laden burial in Panama. Epic discovery dates back over 1,000 years. Ministry of Culture of Panama announced the discovery, made at the El Caño archaeological site in Panama's Coclo province. I spent 3 fun-filled years in Panama. Interesting country. The tomb contains several gold and metal artifacts, including chest plates, ear ornaments, and bracelets, as well as finely crafted ceramics. This particular tomb is called Tomb 3. Archaeologists first identified Tomb 3 in 2009 and didn't realize the complexity of the structure or the extent of its funerary offerings until now. The grave was centered around one individual, surrounded by a series of prestige objects demonstrating his high status within his community's socio-political hierarchy, according to the ministry. Well, you never know, especially in the jungles of Panama, you never know what you're going to find. We found all kinds of things that were absolutely bizarre. Well, Jessica Alba says her heart is fuller after loved up Mexico City adventure with boyfriend Danny Ramirez. She shared a peek at her loved up getaway in Mexico City with her boyfriend. Actress posted a carousel of images from their fun-filled trip, which included exploring the city and going to restaurants together. She shared the sweet moments in the photo dump, including an image of herself kissing Ramirez on the cheek and another photo of Ramirez kissing her cheek. That's certainly exciting. Mother 3 captioned a carousel, the best week in one of my favorite cities. Belly full, heart full. Well, U.S. is reportedly weighing sending forces to seize Iran's nuclear stockpile. And we don't have, at least according to the local news, boots on the ground yet, but certainly we're moving in that direction. Well, a Southwest flight diverted to the Atlanta airport. Armed tactical units detained a man in a frightening security scare. Southwest passengers held hands up as armed security officers boarded the plane Friday night after a reported security threat. Passengers endured a terrifying ordeal last Friday when SWAT teams reportedly swarmed their plane and removed a passenger at gunpoint after an emergency landing, prompted by a potential security threat. Removal occurred about 9 p.m. in Atlanta on Southwest Airlines Flight 2094, which had departed from Nashville and was bound for Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport near Miami. Apparently, the individual became a little frightening to the other passengers. Officers then heard that stormed the plane yelled, "Stand up, let's go, stand up," before they cuffed and dragged the man away. Authorities said multiple local and federal agencies responded to what the FAA described as a passenger disturbance. Well, Ford is in deep water after sweeping recall hits every model since 2020, with one exception. Nearly every Ford model has been affected by recalls between 2020 and 2026, with only the discontinued GT escaping widespread issues. For the past several years, Ford has found itself in hot water, with recalls sweeping through nearly every model in its lineup between 2020 and 2026, all but one. Only the Ford GT, a mid-engine two-seater sports car, escaped the issues that plagued the rest of the lineup, including problems with windshields, suspension, and rear-view cameras. Well, I was not sold on Ford until the vehicle I have now. I have found it to be literally outstanding. Well, on that note, let us turn to our main topic for today. We've been talking about little-known government programs and issues. Today we're going to talk about the era testimony. Fake news that actually started a war. The individual at the center of this wept for the babies. America wept with her, and then came the war. She sat in a small, oversized chair, her voice trembling as she adjusted the microphone. And the bright lights of the congressional chamber reflected off her tear-filled eyes with what that started once uncertainly toward the rows of suited men and women staring down at her. And her hands shook slightly as she took a breath, and the kind of person takes before forcing memories into speech. She said, "My name is Naira, and I was a volunteer to Al Aden Hospital in Kuwait." And then she paused. Cameras rolled, C-SPAN captured the silence as something sacred. Holy stillness broken only by the distant click of a pen or a shuffled paper. And then her voice returned. She says, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. They took them out and left them on the cold floor to die. And then she covered her face with her hands. Quite dramatic, I might say. Gas flooded through the chamber like a sickness. Congressman Tom Lantos leaned forward and said, "You're very brave, so take your time." And she visibly composed herself. Outside the building, Washington was gray and sullen. Inside, the mood was electric. Reporters scribbled furiously. One camera zoomed tight in on her face, catching the flush of her cheeks and the real-time unraveling her composure. The performance was described as raw, devastating, and perfect. Within hours, the headlines spread like wildfire. Rocky atrocities, babies ripped from incubators. NBC led the footage. ABC ran it twice. President George H.W. Bush referenced it in his speech the next day. Americans watching from living rooms and diners and hospital waiting rooms felt it deep in their throats. That helpless kind of grief that twists into fury. It didn't matter that the war in the Persian Gulf was half a world away. To most people, it felt personal. A 15-year-old girl had looked the United States Congress in the eye and described a crime so heinous it demanded response. Not policy, not sanctions, not patience, justice. Within weeks, public support for military intervention in Iraq surged. Senators cited the testimony during floor debates. Lawmakers invoked her name in campaign speeches. Churches held vigils for the lost children. Talk radio boiled with indignation. Editorial pages wept ink across every coast. Now, there were no photos of these dead babies. No hospital staff corroborated the event. There were no time-stamped reports, but the absence of evidence didn't slow the story. In fact, it gave it a certain mystique, an emotional gravity that proof might only have diluted. Mayara never gave her last name. Nobody asked what it was. She was just that Kuwaiti girl, and that was enough. America didn't want details. They wanted purpose. And the story she gave them offered just that, a moral axis, an undeniable villain, an innocent victim, in a nation newly baptized in righteous anger. Not everybody was convinced. In a small apartment in New York, freelance journalist John MacArthur watched the clip replay for the fourth time. He was heard to comment, "She's reading." His girlfriend actually looked up from the kitchen and said, "What?" "She's reading. Watch her eyes. Look at how they drift, left and then right. It's practiced." She said, "It's not the story. It's the way it's being used." Well, in Washington, D.C., a meeting was already underway. At Hill and Knowlton, one of the most powerful public relations firms on the planet, executives reviewed media coverage like war generals poring over battlefield reports. Engagement was up. Public response was intense and favorable. Incubator stories being picked up internationally, and the targets were being met. That agency had worked hard for this moment, but few knew it yet. Outside the Beltway, Americans clung to the image of a girl crying for dead babies. It was a pure story, untainted, just what war needed, a story you couldn't forget. What they didn't know, her name wasn't really Mayara, or that she wasn't just a volunteer at a hospital, but that the war was already underway. In the minds of millions of people, it began the day she cried on camera. Well, the first crack in the story came in the form of a question. John MacArthur sat in his cluttered office in Manhattan, surrounded by stacks of Gulf War coverage, press kits, and congressional transcripts. He'd been digging into that incubator story for weeks. The deeper he went, the thinner it became. He said there were no death certificates, no eyewitness nurses, no doctors from the Al-Adna hospital willing to verify the claim. Even the Kuwaiti government refused interviews. Everything led back to that girl, and nobody seemed to know who she was. Except, quite frankly, somebody had to. A congressional aide speaking on background confirmed what MacArthur suspected. The aide whispered she wasn't just some volunteer, she was connected. MacArthur leaned on that word like a pry bar. In late December 1990, with Operation Desert Storm weeks from ignition, he made calls to Hill and Knowlton. Nobody go on record. Not about the testimony, not about the girl, not about the $10 million contract their firm had secured to manage Kuwait's global image after the Iraqi invasion. Official response was straight and to the point. We don't comment on client strategy. But behind the scenes, that strategy was working. The Kuwaiti government in exile had hired Hill and Knowlton through a front group called Citizens for a Free Kuwait. That name was designed to sound grassroots and American and authentic. PR firm's mission wasn't subtle. Make Saddam Hussein look like a monster. Push the U.S. to act quickly. The girl that turned out had been a key part of that. Her name was Nayara al-Sabah. She was 15 years old. She was the daughter of Saud al-Sabah, the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. Lived in a luxury residence in Washington, D.C., attended an elite private school. She had not been in Kuwait during the invasion. She had never even seen an incubator. That testimony had been scripted, rehearsed, staged. Well, MacArthur sat back in his chair when the pieces finally dropped into place. He wasn't shocked, he was angry. Not because the government had lied. That, he learned long ago, was standard issue. But because he'd used a child to do it. Nobody had bothered to stop him. That story, when it was finally written, ran in the New York Times with a cautious headline. Inquiry cast doubt on the testimony about the Gulf War atrocities. But the damage had already been done. 6 weeks earlier, President Bush had referenced the story in 5 separate speeches. Senators invoked her testimony in the final push to authorize the war. The footage had circled the globe to help transform a complicated regional conflict into a moral imperative. Babies dying on a cold hospital floor. The perfect image. Literally too perfect. In a rare moment of post-mortem candor, one Hill and Knowlton executive would later say the emotional power of that testimony, well, it worked. Early 1991, American tanks rolled across desert sand, airstrikes pounded Baghdad, cable news erupted in graphics and soundtracks. CNN broadcast the invasion in real time. This was a new type of war, cinematic, righteous, televised. Nobody's talking about incubators anymore. The PR firm never issued a correction. Kuwaiti government never offered an apology. Congress held no hearings on the manipulation. For the most part, America moved on. The journalists didn't forget. Neither did the ethicists who began whispering in conferences and classrooms. If truth was optional in war, what else is? Well, Nayara disappeared from the public eye. Her identity confirmed. She retreated into silence. She didn't give any interviews, no retractions. She was 15 after all. Frankly, nobody blamed her directly, but the people around her, the adults who built a war narrative on a child's performance, never faced consequences. At a symposium on media ethics in 1992, a young reporter from Columbia raised his hand and asked, what's the line between propaganda and journalism? Professor hesitated a moment and then said, if you have to ask, maybe we've already crossed it. By the time the dust settled over Kuwait, the babies were forgotten. The victory had been swift, at least by television standards. Desert Storm ended in just 42 days. Baghdad had been pounded into submission. Saddam remained in power, but Kuwait was liberated. The flag was raised again. The oil field still burned. And in American living rooms, the war was already a memory. Tidy, framed, and triumphant. But somewhere beneath that sleek narrative, the rod of manipulation lingered. It wasn't just that a war had been sold with a lie, it was how easy it had been sold. In the months after the revelation of the IRA's true identity, a handful of voices tried to reignite the conversation. Editorials were published. A few members of Congress demanded inquiries into the role of Hill and Knowlton. Citizens for a Free Kuwait campaign and the shadowy architecture of influence that had stitched it all together. Nothing came of it, of course. No hearings were held, no laws were passed, no public acknowledgement ever came from the White House. The lie was absorbed into the bloodstream of public memory. Not corrected, but compartmentalized. When President George H.W. Bush was asked about the testimony during a press conference in 1992, He brushed it off, saying there were many reasons for our actions. We didn't go to war based on one story. But frankly, that wasn't true. Because stories are what move people. Stories cut deeper than policy briefs or satellite images. An image of a teenage girl weeping for murdered babies had done what decades of diplomatic arguments couldn't have done. It made the American people feel the war. In classrooms and journalism schools, the case became a footnote. In PR firms, it actually became a benchmark. Hillary Knowlton never suffered reputational damage. On the contrary, the campaign was hailed within the industry as widely effective. Their Gulf War work became a case study in the persuasive power of emotional framing. Facts, it turns out, are negotiable. But feelings? Well, feelings won wars. Norara, now a woman, has never spoken publicly about her role in the matter. Not even once. Whether she felt remorse or confusion or pride, nobody knows. The silence has become part of the myth. And maybe that's fitting, because the truth was never really about her. She was just the delivery system, not the message. The real story was the system that built her stage, that choreographed the setting, that trained her to cry on cue, that handed her a script written not by survivors but by strategists. In the end, the Ira testimony didn't just expose a lie, it revealed a machine. A machine that could package suffering, manufacture innocence, and deploy it with surgical precision to shape public opinion. The machine learned from it. When future wars needed stories, they knew where to look. Look at a hospital. Look at a child. Look at a camera. A playbook had been written. But the question that remains 30 years later is not whether the lie worked. It's how many times we believed it since that time. Well, from the war in Kuwait, let's turn to something a little bit closer to home. The CIA and what they did in Chile, overthrowing Allende. You know, a democratic government chose him. Washington chose otherwise. Santiago smelled like gasoline and roasted corn the morning the ballots came in. Trunks rumbled over cobblestone streets, plastered with fading posters, red fist, hammer and sickle, slogans promising land and bread and justice. School teachers, mechanics, and miners and poets all waited under a gray sky for the results they already felt in their bones. Salvador Allende had won the election. In September 1970, for the first time in the Americas, a Marxist had come to power, not through bullets but ballots. He was a physician by training. He'd campaigned with a calm professorial voice and the unwavering belief that Chile could walk its own road to socialism. No firing squads. No gulags without Moscow pulling the strings. Well, unfortunately for them, Washington, D.C. didn't see it that way. At the Langley headquarters of CIA, the mood was colder than the concrete walls. The President of the U.S. himself had made it clear. Allende's victory was unacceptable. Not unpleasant, not inconvenient, unacceptable. What's at stake here is the whole damn hemisphere, according to National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger in the closed-door meeting. We're not going to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people. So the cables went out that night. What followed next wasn't a coup, but a war of slow, deliberate strangulation. CIA called it Track 2. Its goal was to destabilize, discredit, and destroy Allende's government before it could fully take root. At Santiago, life continued, but things began to fray. Banks tightened, credit vanished, imports trickled to a stop. Truckers, once apolitical, began striking. Bread lines grew, shelves emptied. Rumors spread that Allende planned to seize private homes, shut down churches, and imprison dissidents. Now, most of it was fiction, of course, but it stuck. Soft kind of violence took hold. Not bullets in the streets yet, but economic sabotage crafted with surgical precision. Back in Washington, President Richard M. Nixon approved $10 million in covert funds. There'd be no congressional oversight. Money didn't go to guns, not at first. It went to whispers, bribes, printed lies, and sympathetic papers. Payments to opposition parties, secret meetings in shadowed cafes. A Catholic bishop was paid to preach against Marxism. Radio stations broadcast fake stories about Cuban soldiers training peasants to turn on their neighbors. The goal, of course, was not revolution. It was exhaustion. In La Moneda Palace, Allende tried to hold his line. He nationalized the copper mines, Chile's lifeblood, snapping them from the hands of U.S. corporations like Anaconda and Kennecott. Retaliation was swift, of course. Legal cases, trade blockades, orchestrated delays in vital supplies. Chilean economy began to shudder under the weight. Still, Allende pressed forward. He walked to work in a bulletproof vest. His personal physician begged him to carry a gun. He refused. Meanwhile, the CIA's network in Chile thickened. Agents met with businessmen and military brass. A secret team known as the 40 Committee, led by Kissinger, approved each move like a chess player nudging a pawn forward. No need for knights yet, no rooks, just patient pressure. In 1971, CIA operatives funneled funds to El Mercurio, the country's most powerful newspaper, became the spearhead of the anti-Allende propaganda, reporting food shortages before they happened, riots that never occurred, dangers that couldn't be verified. And the public began to sway, of course. And Peneleloan, a mother of 5, waited 7 hours in line for flour and muttered we were fools to vote for a dream. But it wasn't just the poor who turned. Middle-class professionals, once intrigued by Allende's promises, began locking their doors tighter at night. Fear had seeped in, not through gunshots, but through scarcity, rumors, fatigue. And all the while, in basement offices around across D.C., men in suits passed around graphs and dossiers tracking the success of the operation like rainfall. Inside the embassy in Santiago, CIA Station Chief Henry Hoxer wrote a memo marked Eyes Only. He says, we're planting the seeds of discontent. We must not expect the tree to fall in a day. Still, there were voices within the agency that balked. One analyst, a junior officer from Chicago, wrote a private note. Said, is this really our job? Chile held a fair election. We're punishing them for choosing wrong. That note never made it to his superiors, of course. By late 1972, the country was cracking. Black markets flourished. Truck drivers brought commerce to a halt. Their fuel mysteriously replenished during strikes. CIA denied involvement, but the ledger said otherwise. And Salvador Allende, graying and weary, stood before the Chilean Congress and warned there are forces beyond our borders who don't wish to see us succeed. We shall not surrender, not to sabotage, not to pressure, not to fear. His voice still carried conviction. But even he began to see the walls closing in. Well, they called it the project, but it had no name on paper. Officially, the CIA's operations in Chile didn't exist. No documents were signed with titles. Funds were funneled through shell organizations, routed through European banks, hidden beneath foundations with names like International Development Research. It was all shadows and handshakes. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Inside the U.S. Embassy in Santiago, the work was precise. Opposition leaders were summoned quietly, conservative senators, Catholic laymen, military men with medals and resentments. Even centrists who had once shaken Allende's hand were now willing to listen. At the center of it all, Henry Hexer took the meetings, smiled softly, and asked one question. What are you willing to do to save Chile? The answer varied, of course, but the message was clear. The clock was ticking. Early 1973, the mood in Chile was electric with paranoia. Demonstrations flared daily, some organic, others carefully orchestrated. Stores closed before sundown. Workers struck and then struck again. Small bombs exploded near government offices. Leftist officials received death threats. Armed men on motorbikes ran circling university campuses. In Washington, D.C., Kissinger received weekly reports. The tone of these reports was common surgical. One said opposition media well positioned. Further assistance requested for printing presses. Another said Army colonels increasingly receptive. Recommends sustained contact. But this action wasn't bloodless, far from it. In June, a failed coup attempt. El Ting Quitazo shook the capital. Tanks rolled toward La Moneda. Gunfire cracked near the palace, and for several hours it looked as though the project might succeed ahead of schedule. But then the uprising collapsed. Loyalists pushed back. Allende emerged unscathed and defiant. went on national radio and said today the people defended democracy with their own hands. Well, it was a Pyrrhic victory. Behind closed doors, Allende knew the next attempt would be better planned and bloodier. And at that point in time, in came Augusto Pinochet. First, he was a quiet figure, clean-shaven, bespectacled, bookish, not a firebrand by any means. He'd been promoted cautiously, almost incidentally, and been seen as a loyal constitutionalist, somebody who'd follow orders, not shape history. Allende trusted him, and that proved to be his fatal mistake. Within weeks of his promotion to commander-in-chief of the Chilean army, Pinochet's tone changed and began meeting more frequently with officers known for their disdain for the Unidad Popular. He said little but listened intently. When questioned, he spoke in abstractions. He talked about stability and order and national preservation. He never once mentioned the word coup. Didn't have to. The CIA accelerated its efforts. Funds increased. Arms shipments were arranged through back channels. Training manuals, some adapted from Vietnam counterinsurgency doctrines, were translated into Spanish and delivered to key operatives. The agency avoided direct orders, but it made its preferences unmistakable. One officer later interviewed in secret said they didn't say overthrow him. They just said we need to restore balance. We all knew what that meant. In the countryside, campesino unions began to break. Conservative landowners, emboldened by the shifting winds, hired paramilitary groups to intimidate, burn, and disappear. Entire villages fell silent overnight. The left cried out. The press ignored them. Santiago, the middle class, watched from their balconies as soldiers drilled more frequently in the parks. They were told it was for their protection. But they all knew. Everybody knew. Allende's circle grew tighter. Some ministers resigned. Others begged him to arm the people. They said, let the workers defend the revolution. But he refused. He believed the military could still be trusted. He believed in the institutions. He believed in Pinochet. CIA's analysts did, and they'd seen the shift. In late July, a confidential memo circulated in Langley that said the Pinochet now considered viable, highly disciplined, commands respect, may be preferable to alternative hardliners. Word preferable did more work than most. Meetings intensified. Plans were drawn. The project was nearly complete. All that remained was the date. This was the silence before the storm, don't you know? Well, it all began before dawn on September 11th, 1973. The streets of Santiago were cloaked in gray mist as convoys rolled out military barracks. Tanks rumbled down Alameda Avenue. Soldiers in olive uniforms moved with a purpose, faces set. The city awoke not to roosters or car horns, but to silence, tension, and the heaviness of something final. 7:55 in the morning, Radio Agricultura broadcast a chilling message. The armed forces and the Carabineros are united in their historic mission of fighting communism and restoring order to Chile. And then the radio went to static. Inside the Moneda Palace, Salvador Allende stood at his desk wearing a gray suit and a helmet over thinning gray hair. In one hand, he held a small submachine gun and AK-47, gift from Fidel Castro engraved with a plaque to my good friend Salvador with affection and admiration. He gave no orders to flee. Instead, he walked slowly to the microphone in the press room and addressed the country for the last time. His voice was steady, grave, without bitterness. He said, I will not resign. I will pay for loyalty to the people of my life. And I say to you that I am certain that sooner rather than later, great avenues will once again open where free men will walk to build a better society. Well, it wasn't a surrender, not by any means. It was a farewell. A mid-morning fighter jet circled above the palace. 11:52 in the morning, they struck. 4 bombs fell. Smoke and fire erupted from the roof. Shelling continued for hours. Inside, the aides wept. Others fled. Allende refused. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, Salvador Allende was dead. The official statement claimed suicide. A bullet to the head. The rifle lay beside him. His glasses, cracked, remained on the floor. Outside, the city had fallen silent again, not in peace, but in shock. That evening, General Augusto Pinochet appeared on national television flanked by officers. He talked about saving the republic, of restoring dignity, of cleansing the nation of Marxist rot. No mention about elections, no timetable for a return to civilian rule, just order and power. In Washington, the news moved quickly. The mood was cautious and measured. CIA issued a statement. We had no involvement in the events of September 11th. White House echoed that line, saying this was a Chilean affair. But the documents would tell a different story. Years later, as investigators combed through declassified files, the narrative unraveled. Operation Foobelt, codenamed Track 2, a detailed contacts with opposition leaders, secret payments, psychological warfare campaigns, explicit efforts to provoke a coup. We hadn't pulled the trigger, not by any means, but we'd handed over the gun, filled the magazine, and whispered where to aim. Well, the aftermath was swift and brutal. Within days, tens of thousands were arrested, soccer stadiums became prisons, torture centers emerged in suburban houses, music was banned, books were burned, unions dissolved, universities were purged, bodies floated down the Pocho River. The junta called it La Reconstrucción, the Reconstruction. For those who survived, it felt like erasure. Victor Jara, beloved singer and poet, had his fingers crushed before being executed in Estadio Chile. His last song, unfinished, was scrawled on scraps of paper smuggled out by prisoners, become an anthem of grief. The U.S. Embassy maintained distance. Statements of concern were issued, but aid continued. Pinochet became a Cold War ally, a partner in anti-communism. As the prisons filled, Washington looked the other way. Inside Chile, the myth grew that the coup had been necessary, even inevitable, that Allende had doomed himself, that Pinochet brought order. It took decades to dismantle that lie. In 1990, democracy returned. Pinochet stepped down, but not without immunity. Wore his uniform like armor, defiantly until the day he died. It was only later that the reckoning came. By 1999, the U.S. government declassified over 16,000 documents related to Chile. The language is bureaucratic, of course, but the truth bled through. The CIA had known, had funded, had manipulated, and in 2000, President Bill Clinton admitted their role publicly. He said it's important that we understand our history. We must never again allow fear to override our commitment to democracy. But by that point in time, the scars had set. The Chilean people remembered. They remembered the ration lines, the tanks, the curfews, and the missing people. They remembered their voices who once built a dream, and that far away in marble halls and wood-paneled rooms, strangers had decided that dreams were too dangerous to live. And so they killed it. In the name of stability. In the name of order. In the name of interests not their own. Well, another secret operation that our government indulged in was what was known as the Mena connection. Drugs, money, and the CIA. It wasn't just drugs, it was a pipeline of cash and weapons and silence. Mena was in Arkansas, don't you know? And in that area, the air smelled like pine and jet fuel. Now, Mena, Arkansas wasn't just the kind of place you'd expect the world to hinge on. Just a speck on the map, dense forest, whispering hills, and a small airstrip tucked between cattle fields. But if you stood near a rich mountain at dawn and listened carefully, you could hear the buzz of something too fast for crop dusters, too sleek for mail planes, something just literally out of place. Well, freelance journalist Sally Denton didn't go looking for Mena. That story pulled her in sideways the way the best ones always did. Phone call in 1986 from an old contact in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There was a quiet voice, full of nervous energy. The question was asked, are you still chasing the Contra story? And she was. Then the voice said, you need to look at Arkansas. She said, what's in Arkansas? And he said, a runway, a lot of ghosts. And then he hung up. Well, she didn't sleep that night. She'd been following the Reagan administration's covert efforts to fund the Contras in Nicaragua after Congress passed the Bolin Amendment. That, of course, was an explicit ban for U.S. support for the rebels. But there were rumors that kept bubbling underneath the surface. Planes flying south full of guns, coming back full of something else. A lot of unmarked crates. Night landings, at the center of it all, a pilot by the name of Barry Seal. A SEAL had a kind of face you forget till you see it again, then you can't. Thick mustache, cocky grin, eyes that stayed 2 seconds ahead of every question. Former TWA captain turned drug smuggler turned DEA informant. He'd flown for Pablo Escobar and then flipped and then vanished into the folds of something stranger. His name kept showing up in sealed indictments and transcripts and whispers. And always, somewhere near his name was the name Mena Intermountain Municipal Airport. Well, once she got that name, Sally started digging. Found local reporters who'd been quietly filing odd stories for years. Stories about unregistered aircraft, suspicious fuel records, a sudden boom in airport security without explanation. Pilots with no flight plans, men with briefcases stepping off Lear jets and vanishing into the Ozarks. And then there was all the money. The town had changed. A lot of new cars, new homes. If you never spent time in Arkansas, things don't move rapidly there. My father's family came from there. In fact, my third cousin's a man by the name of Bill Clinton. There were a few too many briefcase-carrying men at the local diner. And at the center of it all, Barry Seal. It operated a company called Rich Mountain Aviation, supposedly training pilots. But Sally got her hands on FAA documents that showed plane modifications inconsistent with training aircraft. Cargo alterations, rear ramp installations, false panels. And then there was a hangar. It was quiet, always locked up, nobody around. Locals said they saw crates being wheeled in late at night. They all joked about it. One man, half drunk, said that's where the CIA buries the alien bodies. Nobody laughed. Sally tracked down a former mechanic that worked briefly at the airport in 1984. He said they flew in like they owned the place. Didn't show ID, didn't answer questions, just said government business and kept moving. Sally asked what was in the planes, and he said, I never looked, but one time I smelled gasoline and then something else, sweet, chemical, not right. What was in the fall of 1986 that Sally herself drove out to meet her? Town was still, picturesque people, polite but wary. She asked around carefully and heard the same pattern. Everybody had seen something, but nobody wanted to say it out loud because this wasn't a scandal anymore. It was something closer to a myth. That's the kind you keep in the back of your throat. One woman at the motel desk told her, I saw Barry once. He gave my son a $100 bill just for washing his windshield. You ever talk about what he did? Sally asked, and the answer was he said he flew cargo south and north, and that he was protected. Protected by who? The woman smiled and said, well, that's the question, isn't it? Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about some of the strange programs that our government's been up to. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.